Nagarjuna is generally considered to be one of Buddhism's great thinkers, second perhaps only to the Buddha himself. This doesn't, of course, mean that Nagarjuna or even Madhyamaka, the subsect of Mahayana Buddhism he founded, are uncontroversial figures within the Buddhist tradition. In fact, Nagarjuna's arguments have caused a fair bit of turmoil for Buddhism in their day and well after, especially with regards to the rival Yogacara school of thought. Let's examine exactly what Nagarjuna's philosophies were, what they mean for Buddhism, who his critics were, and why his ideas were so controversial and important to the history of Buddhism. Born in southern India and living somewhere between the years of 150 and 250 CE, Nagarjuna is believed to have been born into the Brahmin caste. He later converted to Buddhism, but his upbringing in the priestly caste is sometimes used to explain why he was one of the first important Buddhist thinkers to use Sanskrit. He founded Madhyamaka, the middle way, to stand in the tradition of the Buddha. In doing so, he created what is still a sort of controversy to this day. Nagarjuna first went back and referred to what he saw as the original teachings of the Buddha, not how the Hinayana had interpreted it. After reading the original material before it was so heavily expanded upon and reinterpreted by the Hinayana tradition, he blended it together with what would become the Mahayana teachings of the day. Because of this, he is sometimes considered to be the founder of most major Mahayana thought. At very least, he can be viewed as the transitional point from pre-Mahayana to Mahayana thought. Perhaps Nagarjuna's most infamous contribution to Buddhism is the classic negational literature found in the 70 verses on emptiness, verses from the center, etc. In these works, Nagarjuna explores the nature of emptiness or zeroness, referred to as sunyata. It was Nagarjuna's belief that without zeroness of all things, change would be impossible. One translation phrases it, "If things were not empty, there could be no attainment of what had not been attained, no ending of anguish, and no letting go of all actions and afflictions." In many ways, his philosophy is a response to the metaphysical theories of the day, which tended towards ideas of substances having fundamental natures, etc. This was obviously a far cry from the Buddha's idea of no self, and so Nagarjuna offered a more recognizably Buddhist alternative. Whereas the Buddha himself was said to generally avoid addressing purely metaphysical questions about the nature of the world, dismissing them as unimportant, and beyond the general scope of his goal to cease suffering, Nagarjuna seemed to have no trouble expanding the realm of Buddhism so as to answer these questions. In order to do this, Nagarjuna used a refined version of the four-arrow denial method that the Buddha was reported to employ in order to dodge the very same metaphysical claims. Nagarjuna's most famous and bewildering arguments are in this form. One example of this is the fuel and fire argument, which goes as follows. Nagarjuna would say that clearly the fuel and fire are not the same thing, since one is hot and the other is not. Next, he would say that they are not different because we cannot tell where one ends and the other begins. Nagarjuna then says that they are not both the same and different. And furthermore, he says that they are neither the same nor are they different. What are they comprised of then? Sunyata, zeroness, or emptiness, is the answer Nagarjuna gives. Another way of summing up the idea is the 8 negations. No arising, no extinction, no annihilation, no permanence, no unity, no diversity, no coming, and no going. Nagarjuna also says that all phenomena are empty. Arguments of this sort will be misinterpreted for centuries to come, occasionally even by rival schools of Buddhist thought. It could be said that no great philosophical movement is without its opponents, and for Nagarjuna and the Madhyamaka school, it was the Yogacarans. The Yogacaran school of Mahayana Buddhism was founded by Vasubandhu and his brother Asanga a century or so after Nagarjuna lived. It could be considered a direct response to the pure intellectualism that dominated Buddhism after Nagarjuna. Oddly enough, Vasubandhu was once a Hinayanist who later converted to the Mahayana school, of which his brother Asanga was already a part. His conversion, one would guess, only serves to reinforce the Mahayana idea that the Hinayana is for inferior students or beginners. Interestingly enough, Vasubandhu had various debates, not against Madhyamakans, but rather against the Hinayana thinkers he was once one of. The Yogacara school of Buddhist thought is seen by many as a sort of compromise approach that unites both the meditative practices and philosophical ideas of Buddhism. In fact, one of the main criticisms that Yogacarans tend to make of Madhyamaka is that it provides little guidance with regards to meditation. Because of this, Yogacarans see their method of marrying thought with practice as creating the most moderate and at the same time most comprehensive of all Buddhist schools. Obviously, those who follow the Madhyamaka are quick to disagree with this claim. Superiority debates aside, I think much of the Yogacaran problem with Madhyamaka stems from Nagarjuna's negational arguments. It is often said that Nagarjuna's philosophy is world-denying. That is to say, with all the negation he does, there is nothing left to hold on to or believe in. In many ways, the Yogacara school has suggested this and used it to its advantage. It has been proposed that Nagarjuna's belief-destroying arguments led students to a nihilistic view of the world. In other words, that there really is only nothingness. Again, the Yogacara school is thought to be superior to Madhyamaka because it isn't as philosophically radical, even though one could argue that radical philosophy was not only Nagarjuna's trademark, but also his greatest strength. While there is little chance of denying the claim that Nagarjuna's philosophy of sunyata is often seen as a world-denying nihilistic idea, such reading of Nagarjuna's idea are false and misguided in the end. Nagarjuna's negational arguments are designed specifically to point out the falseness of our concepts, such as the distinction between two things, and destroy these concepts in the process. In this way, he seeks to continue exactly what the Buddha proposed. In other words, freedom from attachment, even to the extent that we are free from attachment to our very concepts, since they are inadequate in portraying ultimate truth. Of this freedom from concepts, dealing in this case with nirvana and samsara, Nagarjuna said, "What is identity and what is difference? What is eternity, what not eternity? What means eternity and non-eternity together? What means negation of both issues? The bliss consists in the cessation of all thought, in the quiescence of plurality. No separate reality was preached at all, nowhere and none by Buddha." Nagarjuna views things as located somewhere in between existing independently of its own accord and being annihilated entirely. Nagarjuna uses these ideas as an extension of praticca samutpada, interdependent co-origination. One thing must be made completely clear. Nagarjuna does not deny that phenomena exist or are real. The final negation of his argument in fact asserts the truth of their existence. However, nothing exists independently. All is interconnected in the same idea of praticca samutpada that the Buddha himself discovered centuries before Nagarjuna's time. It can be said that phenomena are only real then on the level of a relative truth. This, of course, is opposed to the ultimate level of truth that both the Buddha and Nagarjuna are fundamentally concerned with as the means to be free of suffering and wrong ideas, etc. There is no question that Nagarjuna's ideas are philosophically difficult in nature. Their difficulty seems to be the biggest sticking point in regards to people accepting Madhyamaka in Nagarjuna himself. It was suggested by the Yogacarans that Nagarjuna's philosophies were too extreme, that they go too far and in the end do more harm than good, but ultimately such is not the case. An accurate understanding of Nagarjuna's negational arguments and philosophies reveals that his work truly is in the spirit of the Buddha, albeit taken to new levels. In all reality, Nagarjuna takes the Buddha's basic yet profound ideas and pushes them farther than the Buddha himself would probably have ever thought possible. In doing so, Nagarjuna gives Buddhists everywhere a distinctly Buddhist metaphysical view based on a combination of the ideas of no self and interconnected co-origination. Even more so, he attacks worldly attachments in interesting and vigorous ways, going so far as to declare war on concepts themselves, since they are often misleading and distracting. Phenomena are empty in an important sense, and in the same way that applies to everything that is, as Nagarjuna puts it, between existence and non-existence. Everything is between existence and non-existence, in that nothing arises independently, and yet things arise. What exists between existence and non-existence? Emptiness, of course, is the answer. The same emptiness that is described in the Buddha's own doctrine of no-self. Nagarjuna merges with the Buddha's idea of interdependent co-origination to form his very own, very profound idea of sunyata.